The wind was cold that night, and the small settlement lay quiet under the pale light of 2 moons as Mark sat near the fire in his small cabin, thinking about nothing in particular. When suddenly there was a knock on his door, sharp and quick-like. Someone desperate. His first thought was that it might be a neighbor, but the sound was too faint to hesitate, so he stood and walked to the door. His boots making a soft thud on the wooden floor. As he reached for the handle, he heard a voice. Soft, almost like a breath. "I can cook, I can clean, I can be quiet." The words drifted through the door like a fragile thread pulled by the wind. He frowned, not sure if he had imagined it, but then it came again. "I can cook, I can clean, I can be quiet." Mark opened the door slowly, and there she was, a small figure standing in the dim light. Her skin a soft, pale shade, unlike any human, with a faint shimmer that caught the moonlight. Her eyes, large and frightened, looked up at him, and for a moment he felt the cold night press against his back. She wore a simple, worn cloak, torn at the edges, and clutched a small bundle close to her chest, as if it were the only thing she owned. Her voice trembled when she spoke again. "Please let me in. I will not cause trouble." For a long second Mark said nothing, his mind spinning. He knew the rules. Harboring an unregistered alien was a crime in this sector, and the patrols were strict, but there was something about her. They held a mix of fear and exhaustion. And something else, something like hope. He stepped aside without another word, and she slipped inside quickly, her head lowered, as if afraid to meet his gaze. The warmth of the cabin seemed to make her shiver even more. She stood near the door, as if unsure whether she was allowed to move. Finally, Mark spoke. "Who are you, and why are you here?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the bundle. "I cannot tell you, not yet. Please, just let me stay until morning. I can work for you, cook, clean, whatever you want. I will be silent." Mark studied her for a moment. He could see faint bruises on her wrists, as if from tight restraints, and the bundle she held was nothing more than a small bag made from rough fabric. He wanted to ask more, but something outside caught his attention. Faint footsteps in the snow, slow, deliberate, like someone searching. He moved to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to peek out. Shadows moved beyond the fence, tall figures scanning the area. His pulse quickened. "You are being followed, aren't you?" he asked quietly. She gave no answer, but her silence was enough. He felt the air grow heavier. He had a choice to make: send her out into the cold and danger, or let her stay and risk his own safety. He thought about the isolation of the settlement, how news traveled fast, and how one wrong move could bring trouble to his door. Yet, as he looked at her, he knew he could not turn her away. Mark closed the curtain and locked the door, his voice low. "Follow me." He led her to a small storage room near the back of the cabin, where sacks of grain and tools were kept. It was cramped, but warmer than outside. "Stay here, and do not make a sound." She nodded quickly, her eyes wide with gratitude. He returned to the main room just as the footsteps grew louder now. There was a knock, firm and commanding. "Open up, Colony Patrol." Mark felt his chest tighten. He opened the door slightly. Two figures in dark armor stood there, their faces hidden behind visors. One of them spoke. "We are looking for a runaway alien small female seen in this area. Have you noticed anything unusual tonight?" Mark forced a calm expression. "No, just a quiet evening." They glanced past him, scanning the room, their eyes resting on the faint trail of wet footprints leading from the door to the back hall. He stepped sideways, blocking their view. "The wind is blowing snow into the cabin," he said quickly. "I was just about to sweep it up." The patrol hesitated, then one of them leaned closer. "If you see anything, report it immediately. She is dangerous." Mark nodded, keeping his voice steady. Of course. They turned and walked away, their heavy boots crunching on the snow until the sound faded into the distance. He closed the door and let out a slow breath, his heart still racing. He moved to the storage room, opening it just enough to see her. She was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, eyes wide with fear. "They are gone," he said. "For now," she whispered. "Thank you." Mark sat near the fire again, staring into the Flames wondering what trouble he had just invited into his life. Yet somewhere, deep inside, a quiet thought told him. This night was only the beginning, and whatever path he had stepped onto, there was no turning back. The fire had burned low during Ludi Modi Cobb. During the night, and Mark stirred awake to the faint scent of something warm and savory drifting through the cabin. The smell was unexpected because he lived alone and rarely cooked anything more than simple rations. He rose from his bed, pulling on a worn sweater, and moved quietly toward the kitchen. There she was, the alien girl from last night, standing with her back to him, moving carefully as she stirred a pot on the small stove. Her cloak had been folded neatly over the chair, revealing a simple dress that looked old but clean. Her hair fell forward, hiding her face as she worked. Silently, she had found bread on the shelf and a few herbs from a jar, and somehow turned them into something that made the whole cabin feel alive for a moment. Mark simply watched, unsure how to begin the conversation. Then he stepped closer, making the floorboard creak. She froze, her shoulders tensing as if ready to flee before he could speak. She said softly, "I made breakfast. I hope it is fine. I used only what I could find." Mark sat at the table, still trying to understand who she really was and why she had come to his door. "I never told you to cook," he said. In a calm tone, she glanced at him briefly, her eyes lowering again. "I said I can cook, and I can clean. I thought you would allow me to start today." Her voice carried no demand, only a quiet hope, as if she was used to earning her place after. They ate in silence. Mark asked the question that had been pressing on his mind since last night. "Why are you running from them?" She did not answer at once. Instead, she reached for the pot and began washing it. With slow movements, finally, she said, "They will not stop until they find me, and if they find me, they will take me back to a place where I will not survive." Mark leaned forward. "You mean prison?" Her hands paused. "No, worse. There was a sudden noise outside, a faint scraping sound against the wall. Both of them froze. Mark stood quickly, moving to the window. He saw nothing at first, but then caught the glimpse of a shadow slipping past the edge of the cabin. When he turned back, the girl was already clutching her bundle close, her voice urgent. "They are still searching. They will come back here. You must not be seen with me." Mark felt an old stubbornness rise within him. He had spent years avoiding trouble, but something about her words and the way she seemed to shrink from the world made it impossible for him to push her away. "You cannot keep running forever," he said. She shook her head. "I have no choice. They own me, and if I am found, they will hurt me until I forget I am alive." Sharp knock rang through the cabin, louder than before. Mark gestured for her to hide. She slipped behind the pantry door just as he opened the main door slightly. A tall human man stood outside, wearing the brown jacket of the local trade post, his expression tense. "Mark, you have visitors coming. Patrol ships just landed near the east fields. Better stay inside." Mark nodded with thanks, but before the man could leave, he added, "Have you seen a girl alien about so high, with light skin and strange eyes?" Mark kept his voice steady. "No one like that here." The trader narrowed his eyes for a moment, then left in the opposite direction. When Mark closed the door, the girl stepped out, her breathing uneven. "You risked yourself for me again," she said quietly. "Why?" He hesitated, looking at the floor before answering. "Maybe because once someone risked themselves for me when I had nowhere else to go." She studied him, as if trying to see the truth in his words. The rest of the morning passed in tense silence. Mark checked the window every few minutes. The girl busied herself by sweeping the floor and tidying the shelves, each movement careful and precise, like she had been trained for it. Yet there was a fragility in her manner, as if she expected every sound to be the start of danger. By midday, the wind had shifted, bringing the scent of metal and fuel from the colony airfield. Mark knew that meant more patrols. Or worse, merchant hunters. They were faster and crueler than any official force. He found her near the back room and said, "We may have to leave tonight." She looked at him uncertainly. "Where will we go away from here?" "Into the outer ridge. There are Places they will not search, she hesitated, but finally nodded. If you think it is safe. They shared another quiet meal as the light faded outside, the cabin shadows lengthened, and the sound of distant engines filled the air. The girl sat by the fire, her bundle beside her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "I never asked your name," she said softly. "Mark," he replied. "And yours?" She looked down. "I cannot tell you, not yet." It would bring more danger that night. As they prepared to sleep, the same faint scraping sound came again, this time closer. Mark reached for the old hunting knife he kept by his bed and moved to the window. His eyes scanned the darkness but saw nothing. Still, he felt the weight of unseen eyes watching from just beyond the light of the cabin. When he turned, she was standing behind him, her voice barely a whisper. "They are here." The night was still, but the air felt heavy and sharp, carrying the faint hum of machines in the distance. Mark stood by the window, holding his breath as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. The sound of slow, measured footsteps came from the frozen path outside. They were not the hurried steps of a neighbor or trader. These were deliberate, each one pressing into the snow with the weight of armor. A cold chill ran down his spine as two tall figures came into view, moving along the fence line, scanning with handheld devices that pulsed faint green light across the ground. He moved away from the window and turned to the girl, her face pale and tense. "They are here," she whispered. Mark motioned for her to follow him quickly to the back of the cabin where the storage cellar door was hidden beneath a thick rug. He pulled it open, revealing a narrow wooden ladder leading down to a cramped, dark space. "Get inside and do not make a sound." She clutched her bundle tighter and descended without a word. The faint creak of the ladder seemed too loud in the silence. He closed the hatch and dragged the rug back into place. "Say sharp." Knock rattled the front door, this time not polite but demanding. Mark took a steadying breath and opened it. Just enough to face the visitors. The two figures stood close, their armor dark and scratched from long-used visors, hiding their faces behind an otherworldly sheen. One spoke in a voice cold and precise. "Human, we are tracking a fugitive alien female. She is young, small frame, light skin, unusual eyes. She was seen near this sector. Have you had any visitors tonight?" Mark kept his tone even though only the quiet of winter. They studied him, their scanners sweeping over his doorway. The faint light flickered as the device passed by the floor where the hidden hatch lay under the rug. One of them stepped forward, his boots leaving deep marks in the snow. He leaned slightly as if trying to peer inside the cabin without permission. Mark shifted to block his view. The fire was burning low. He said, "I was about to turn in for the night." Second figure adjusted his scanner and frowned. The signal was stronger here, then weaker perhaps. "The trail is fading." The first nodded, but did not step back. He asked, "Where does this road lead?" Mark answered, "To the ridge, and then the old mines, but no one goes there in winter. The wind will kill you." The armored man finally turned away, but his voice carried a warning. "If you see her and do not report it, the punishment will be worse than death." They walked away slowly, their shapes fading into the dark, until only the sound of their boots remained. Mark shut the door quietly, his heart still pounding. He moved quickly to the cellar hatch, lifting it just enough to see her crouched in the shadows, her wide eyes staring up at him. She emerged silently, her movements cautious. "Did they believe you?" she asked. "Maybe for now," he replied, "but they will come back. They know you were near here." She nodded slowly, her shoulders sagging under the weight of fear. He poured water into a cup and handed it to her. Her hands trembled as she drank. Mark sat opposite her at the table. "We need a plan. You cannot hide here forever." She looked down. "I know, but I cannot go back, and I cannot stay outside. They have trackers that follow scent and sound. I have seen them chase others until there was nothing left." Mark felt the heaviness of her words settle in the room. He had heard stories of such hunts, but seeing the fear in her eyes made it real. They spent the next hour in low voices speaking of the ridge, the old mines, and the possible paths beyond the patrol zone. She revealed little about herself, but each small detail painted a darker picture. She had been held in a compound where her kind worked in silence for long hours, given only enough food to survive, and punished for the smallest disobedience. One day she had managed to slip past the guards with the help of an older prisoner who told her to find a human in this sector, the one with kind eyes. She had run for 2 nights before finding Mark's cabin. The wind outside grew louder, scraping branches against the roof. Mark stood and checked the door again. No movement, no sound, only the cold pressing in on the walls. He turned back to her. "You will sleep in the back room tonight, but keep your bundle close in case we have to leave quickly." She gave a faint nod, rising from the chair before they parted for the night. She hesitated at the doorway to the back room, her voice a whisper. "Thank you for not giving me to them." Mark looked at her for a long moment, then simply said, "Rest while you can." Hey stayed awake long after she had gone to bed, sitting near the fire and listening for any sound beyond the crackle of the flames. Each creak of the cabin made him tense, and every shadow seemed to hold movement. Though none did yet, the unease would not leave him, for he knew the searchers would not stop until they found her, and when they returned, it might not be with questions, but with weapons. The morning light crept slowly into the cabin, its pale glow touching the wooden walls and the sleeping form of the girl in the back room. Mark had been awake for hours, his mind restless from the night before. The memory of the searchers still lingered, and each gust of wind against the cabin made him glance at the window. When the girl finally stirred, she moved quietly, as if afraid to make noise, carrying her bundle close. Even when stepping into the kitchen, Mark handed her a cup of warm tea. She accepted it with a small nod and sat near the fire. The heat from the flames seemed to ease the tension in her shoulders, but her eyes still carried a guarded look. Mark watched her for a moment before speaking. "Last night you said you cannot go back, but you never told me why." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "I am not sure you want to hear it." He leaned forward. "I think I need to hear it if I am going to help you." She stayed silent for a long time. The only sound was the soft crackle of the fire. Then she began speaking in a low, steady voice. "I was born in a place where no one calls you by name. We were given numbers and told to work. From the moment we could walk, I learned to cook and clean, because that was all I was allowed to do. No talking unless spoken, to no questions, no rest beyond the hours they allowed." Her gaze drifted to the flames, as if the fire reminded her of something distant. "The master said we were property, and property does not need dreams." Mark felt a heaviness settle in the room. She went on, "Sometimes people from outside came to see us. Some were buyers, some were inspectors, some came to choose who would serve them. Those chosen left and never came back. When I grew older, they said I would soon be taken too, but I refused to go quietly. I hid, I fought, I was punished for weeks. Then one day, someone came to me in secret. He was not one of them. He was another worker, older and sick. He told me there was a way to escape if I could reach the human colony. He said, there is a man there who once helped someone like us. He has kind eyes. Find him, and he will not turn you away." Mark shifted uncomfortably, her words pulling at memories he had long buried years ago. During the last border skirmish, he had sheltered a wounded alien child in his home. Risking arrest, the child had vanished after recovery, and he had never heard from them again. Could this girl be connected to that moment? Somehow, she did not notice his silence. She continued, "I ran that night and the next day, and the day after that. They followed me with machines that can smell fear, but I kept running until I saw your cabin light, and I thought, maybe I found the right place." She looked at him. Finally, as if waiting for him to speak, Mark did not know what to say. Instead, he asked, "What will they do if they find you?" She looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "They will make sure I forget who I am, and then they will sell me." Her words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Before he could respond, a faint noise outside made them Both freeze footsteps crunching through the snow, slow, deliberate, the same as before. Mark moved to the window, lifting the curtain just enough to see nothing but white light and the long dark shape of the fence line. No figures, no movement, but the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. He let the curtain fall and turned back to her. "We do not have much time. They will return, and next time they will not leave without searching every corner." She stood, her bundles still in hand. "What will we do?" Mark looked at her for a long moment, then said, "We leave tonight through the ridge and into the old mines. From there, we can reach the southern pass." She hesitated. "Is it safe?" He shook his head. "Nothing is safe now, but staying here is worse." The rest of the day passed in tense preparation. Mark packed what little food and supplies he had into a worn canvas bag. The girl cleaned the cabin methodically, as if erasing signs of their stay outside. The wind began to pick up, carrying the distant hum of patrol engines. By the time darkness fell, the hum had grown louder. Mark tightened the straps on his bag and handed her a thick coat. "You will need this. The ridge is colder than here." They stepped out into the snow, their breath turning to mist. In the air, the path ahead was narrow and half hidden by drifts. Each step made a crunching sound that seemed too loud in the stillness. Mark kept glancing over his shoulder. The girl walked close behind, her eyes darting to the shadows on either side. When they reached the edge of the settlement, Mark paused, scanning the open ground before them. Far in the distance, a faint light moved slowly across the horizon, a patrol craft sweeping the area. He gestured for her to stay low, and they began moving along the tree line, the snow muffling their steps. The cold bit into their faces, but neither spoke. They both knew words could draw attention. As they neared the base of the ridge, a sudden sound split the air, a sharp mechanical cry from behind them. They turned to see a dark shape moving quickly through the snow, heading in their direction. Mark grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the rocky incline. The ridge would hide them if they could reach it in time, but the sound was getting closer, and the shadows at their backs grew longer with each step. The wind roared against the ridge, carrying the cry of the machine that hunted them. Mark pulled the girl forward, his boots slipping on the icy rock, each step a battle against the cold and the slope behind them. The dark shape closed the distance, its legs moving in a mechanical rhythm too steady to be human. He knew if it reached them, there would be no escape. They scrambled higher, the snow giving way under their weight, sending loose stones tumbling down the incline. The girl clung to her bundle with one arm, using the other to steady herself. Her breath came in sharp clouds that vanished into the darkness. Mark could feel his own chest burning from the climb, but the sound behind them kept him moving. At the top of the ridge, the wind hit them full force, tearing at their coats and pushing against their bodies. Mark scanned the horizon for any sign of cover and saw a narrow opening between two jagged rocks, just wide enough for them to slip through. He pulled her toward it, the machine's cry echoing louder with each passing second. They squeezed into the gap, the stones scraping against their shoulders, and emerged into a hollow space sheltered from the wind. Mark leaned against the rock, catching his breath. The girl stood still, listening for the sound of pursuit. It came quickly, the machine's heavy steps stopping just outside the gap. A beam of pale light swept across the entrance, pausing for a long moment. Mark's hand went to the knife at his belt, knowing it would be useless against metal, but unable to stand. Unarmed, the light shifted, then faded. The sound of footsteps retreating into the wind, but he knew it was not gone. "Only circling. We cannot stay here," he said. The girl nodded, her voice a whisper. "Where do we go now?" He pointed toward the lower slope beyond the hollow. "There is an old shelter near the mines. If we can reach it, we can rest and decide the next move." She glanced toward the gap as if expecting the machine to reappear, then followed him down the narrow path. The slope was treacherous, the snow hiding loose rocks and sudden drops. More than once the girl stumbled, but Mark caught her each time. The cold seemed to press in from every side, seeping through their coats. The only warmth came from the movement itself, and the faint hope that they might find safety ahead halfway down. They spotted something in the snow, a small metallic device no larger than a hand blinking with a faint red light. Mark crouched to examine it, his stomach tightening. It was a tracker, and it had been left directly in their path. He looked around, quickly scanning the snow for more, and saw another near the base of the slope. "They are marking our trail," he said. "If we keep going this way, they will follow us straight to the shelter." The girl's eyes widened. "What do we do?" Mark thought quickly, and pulled a length of rope from his bag. Tying the tracker to it, he swung it in a slow arc before hurling it as far as he could into the darkness. The faint red light vanished behind the rocks. Then he moved to the second tracker and crushed it. Under his boot, the metal cracking with a sharp sound that seemed too loud in the silent night. They changed direction, moving along the side of the ridge instead of down. Mark hoped the altered path would throw off pursuit, but he knew it was only a matter of time before the hunters adjusted. The girl kept closer steps, quick despite exhaustion. He could see the determination in her face, and it reminded him of another flight long ago, when he had been the one running. At last they reached a narrow overhang, and the rock. Mark led her under it and into a shallow cave. The walls were damp, and the air smelled of earth, but it was hidden from view. He lit a small fire with the dry twigs he had gathered earlier, the flames casting faint shadows. Across the stone, the girl sat close to the warmth, her hands wrapped around the bundle she had carried since they met. "What is inside?" he asked. She hesitated, then slowly opened the cloth, revealing a small metallic sphere marked with strange symbols. It pulsed faintly with blue light. She looked at him with a mix of fear and defiance. "This is why they want me," she said. "This is not just mine. It belongs to my people, and if they take it, they will control more than you can imagine." Mark stared at the sphere, realizing that her presence in his cabin had never been chanced. She had come carrying something worth risking lives over before. He could speak. A faint worry sound reached them from outside the cave. The girl quickly wrapped the sphere. Again, Mark put out the fire, plunging them into darkness. They waited in silence, the sound growing louder until it was directly above them. Then, after a long moment, it began to fade. Carried away by the wind, Mark let out a slow breath and whispered, "We move again at dawn." The first pale light of dawn crept over the ridge, casting long shadows across the frozen ground. Mark had barely slept, his mind replaying the sound of the machine passing overhead. The girl had stayed silent through the night, holding her bundle close as if it were part of her own body. When the faint warmth of morning touched the entrance of the cave, he rose and checked the horizon. The sky was clear, but the silence was heavy. No birds, no wind, just the feeling that something waited beyond sight. "We go now," he said. The girl stood without question, her breath misting in the cold air. Mark led the way along the narrow ridge path, the snow crunching softly beneath their boots. Every sound seemed sharper in the stillness. They moved quickly but carefully, avoiding open ground whenever possible. "The mines are less than an hour ahead," he said. "If we make it there before the patrol sweeps, we might lose the mass." They descended toward the valley. The terrain grew harsher, jagged. Rocks jutted from the snow like broken teeth, forcing them to weave between them. Mark kept scanning the slopes above for movement. Each time the light shifted, his heart gave a small jolt. The girl followed close behind her, steps light but steady. Despite the exhaustion that marked her face halfway to the valley floor, they heard it, the low hum of engines drifting on the cold air. Mark's eyes searched the ridgeline until he saw the dark shapes moving against the pale sky. Patrol flyers gliding in a slow, sweeping pattern, their search beams cutting across the snow. He grabbed the girl's arm and pulled her toward a cluster of boulders crouching low as one of the beams passed dangerously close. The light moved on, but he knew they could not stay here for long. They began moving again, this time staying tight to the shadows. The path took them into a narrow gully where the snow lay deep and untouched. Mark's boots sank with each step, slowing them down. The girl stumbled more than once but caught herself without complaint at the far end of the gully. A dark opening yawned in the rock, the entrance to one of the old mine tunnels. Mark's relief was tempered by caution. These tunnels were unstable and half-collapsed in places. But they offered the only real cover for miles inside the tunnel. The air grew colder and damp. The sound of their footsteps echoed faintly off the stone walls. Mark lit a small lantern, casting a dim glow ahead. The girl kept close, her eyes scanning the shadows as if expecting something to step out at any moment. They moved deeper, the narrow passage twisting through the rock in uneven turns. After several minutes, they reached a small chamber where rusted tools lay scattered across the floor. Mark set the lantern down and took a moment to listen. No sound but the slow drip of water from the ceiling. "We can rest here for a moment," he said. She nodded, sitting on an old crate, her hands never leaving the bundle. Mark studied her in the dim macrede. And her nim? Light, wondering again about the strange sphere she carried and the danger it brought. Their rest was cut short by a faint metallic clang from deeper in the tunnel. Both of them froze. Mark snuffed the lantern, plunging them into darkness. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by a low, grinding noise like metal on stone. The girl's hand found his arm in the dark, her grip tight. "It is them," she whispered. Mark listened, straining to hear. Beyond the pounding of his own heart, the grinding grew louder, joined by the faint hiss of hydraulics. He realized with a cold certainty that one of the machines had entered the tunnel's move, he said, guiding her toward the side passage he had noticed earlier. They slipped into it just as a pale light flared in the main tunnel, the machine's beams sweeping the chamber. Where they had been moments before, the side passage was narrow, forcing them to move single file, the stones scraping against their shoulders. The light from the machine flickered through cracks in the rock, chasing them as they hurried forward. The passage opened into another chamber, larger and filled with old mine carts and broken rails. Mark pulled the girl behind one of the carts, just as the light spilled into the room. The machine entered its steps, slow but relentless, scanning every corner with its beam. Mark held his breath, willing himself to be still. The girl pressed close, her bundle wedged between them. The machine paused, its head tilting as if listening. Then it turned and moved toward the opposite passage, the grinding noise fading with each step. When the sound was gone, Mark exhaled quietly. "We keep moving until we are out of the tunnels." They followed the tracks deeper into the mine, the air growing colder with each step. The tunnel sloped upward now, and Mark's hope rose with it. After several minutes, a faint glow appeared ahead, the pale light of day filtering through a setha. Wind tore through the gorge, making the rope bridge sway wildly under their feet. Mark kept his eyes forward, the far end only a few planks away. The girl clung to the side ropes, her knuckles white as the deep mechanical roar behind them grew louder, the sound of engines mixed with the faint whir of targeting systems. Mark knew they had been spotted. There was no time to look back. He urged her on, faster, until her boots touched the snow of the far side. He followed, leaping the final plank as the ropes behind them shuddered under the weight of something landing on the bridge. They ran for the cover of the rocky path. The sound of the bridge straining behind them filled the air, followed by the crack of wood snapping. Mark risked a glance back. The dark shape of a machine was halfway across its weight, pulling the ropes lower, the planks breaking one by one. He turned away, pulling the girl onward. Before the machine could leap to solid ground, the path curved sharply, leading them behind a wall of stone that shielded them from sight. The southern pass lay ahead, a narrow cut through the ridge where the wind whistled like a living thing. The snow here was deep and untrodden, their steps leaving a clear trail, but there was no choice. Mark pushed forward, the cold biting at his face. The girl kept close, her breath short and fast. In the distance, faint columns of smoke rose from a cluster of small buildings, the hidden settlement that few outside the ridge even knew existed. They reached the edge of the pass when a shadow fell over them, a patrol flyer gliding low, engines humming. The machine on the bridge must have sent a signal. Mark pulled the girl into a narrow crevice in the rock, pressing them both against the cold stone. The flyer passed overhead, its search beam sweeping the snow and stopping briefly on their trail. Mark's heart pounded, but the beam moved. On the flyer continuing toward the settlement, "We move quickly now," he said, and they stepped back into the open, following the trail toward. The smoke as they approached the buildings came into view, small, sturdy structures built into the base of the ridge. People moved between them, bundled against the cold. Mark raised his hand in greeting to a tall man who stepped forward. The man's eyes narrowed in surprise. "Mark, I thought you were done with bringing trouble across the pass." Mark gave a faint smile. "Trouble has a name this time, and it is worth more than gold." The tall man studied the girl, then looked back at Mark. "What is she carrying?" Mark glanced at the bundle she held close and said something that needs to stay far from the ones chasing her. The man hesitated, then nodded. "Bring her inside." They entered a low building warmed by a central fire. The air smelled of wood smoke and herbs. The girl looked around, wide-eyed, as if she had stepped into another world. Mark guided her to a bench near the fire. For the first time since meeting him, she set the bundle on her lap without holding it, as if she finally believed it was safe here. She looked at Mark with a small, hesitant smile. "I can cook, I can clean, I can be quiet," she began. But he stopped her with a shake of his head. "You can also speak, laugh, and live without fear." Now she seemed unsure what to say. The warmth of the fire softening the tension in her face. After a long moment, she whispered, "I thought when I knocked on your door that night you would turn me away. Everyone else had, but you opened it without asking who I was." Mark leaned back in his chair, thinking of the warnings from the patrol, the danger they had faced, and the choice he had made. "I think I knew before. You even spoke that I could not let you face the cold." Alama. Tall man returned with a small bowl of stew. Placing it in front of her, she ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were the first real meal she had in years. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the distant hum of engines. But here in the settlement, the sound was faint, the ridge and the mines between them acting as a barrier. Mark knew the hunters might try again, but he also knew this place was well hidden and fiercely guarded. When the bowl was empty, she looked at him again, her voice quiet but steady. "You have given me more than safety. You have given me a life." Mark shook his head. "You gave yourself that. I only opened the door." She smiled faintly, the firelight catching in her eyes. For a moment, the weight of her past seemed to lift, replaced by something new, something fragile but real. As night fell, the settlement lights glowed warm against the snow. Mark stood at the doorway, looking out across the pass. The wind still howled, and the mountains still loomed, but the fear that had chased them for so long felt distant now. Behind him, the girl's soft laughter reached his ears, a sound he had not heard before. It was the sound of someone who had survived. He closed the door against the cold and stepped back into the warmth, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it from here together. And somehow he felt certain that opening his door that night had been the choice that would change both their lives. Forever lapsed section of the roof, they climbed over the rubble, emerging onto a snow-covered ledge overlooking a deep gorge far below. Mark knew the southern pass lay beyond the gorge, but reaching it would mean crossing the old rope bridge swaying in the wind. The bridge looked worn, frayed ropes creaking under the weight of the snow. He turned to the girl, her eyes fixed on the span ahead. "There is no other way," she said quietly. He nodded and stepped onto the first plank, the wood groaning beneath his weight. The girl followed each step, sending a tremor through the ropes. The wind howled through the gorge, but they kept moving one step at a time. Halfway across, a new sound rose above the wind, the deep, mechanical roar of engines approaching fast. Mark did not look back. He only tightened his grip on the ropes and urged her forward. The far side was close, but so was the danger.